now. We also just got some breaking news into CNN on the Republican tax reform effort. So our senior White House correspondent, Jeff Zeleny, is going to join me with that news. The president has now won over one more of those Republican senators. Who is he?
Well, Brooke, good afternoon. Senator Rand Paul, of course, the Republican from Kentucky, he tells our Lauren Fox that he is likely to support the tax plan moving through the Senate. Of course, that is important. The White House is still keeping an eye on every Republican vote. It is uncertain if they have enough. They, of course, can only lose 2 Republicans in the Senate. So Rand Paul saying that he will likely support this is certainly something that the White House, is going to be happy about. But the caveat is he's likely to support this if it has the repeal of the health care mandate in it. And that is by far from a done deal yet, because what they're trying to do is find support across the sort of sea of Republicans who are uncertain on this. So Rand Paul is a likely supporter of this, but Brooke, with the Senate out this week for the Thanksgiving break, not coming back until next week, this is going to remain an open question really throughout the week if there are enough Republicans to support this plan. Of course, Senator Ron Johnson, Republican of Wisconsin, has said he will not support it in its current form. Susan Collins, of course, Republican, remained very skeptical of this. So it certainly is something that the White House is watching, but again, will not be resolved until, of course, the Senate reconvenes next week, Brooke.
Jeff, let me come back to you in a second, but just quick analysis with our political director, David Chalian. So Jeff says, all right, the caveat with Senator Paul is if the individual mandate, remains in, he's a yes. But if it remains in, and we have the sort of the senator baseball cards on the screen, if it remains in, other senators would be out.
Yeah, like that one there from Maine, Susan Collins, who expressed big reservations about the individual mandate repeal being a part of the tax bill, Brooke. As you know, this is what it's all about when you're counting votes, right? You have to figure out what needs to be in there in order to get the 51 votes they need. When you take Rand Paul's yes, or likely yes, because of the individual mandate, you begin to understand why the individual mandate repeal was put into the bill to begin with, which is that some on the right and conservative side of the equation may have had concerns about adding to the deficit and the debt with this bill. Perhaps it wasn't as targeted to the middle class as they had hoped. But when you get the key core principle of stripping away the individual mandate in Obamacare, you can start to assuage concerns on the right. That's a much bigger pot of votes for Mitch McConnell to wrangle than perhaps if he could get away with just losing Susan Collins from Maine.
So it's about money, it's about revenue. These are the wild cards, and we'll get more into these senators in a second, but let me pivot back to the White House briefing room, back to Jeff Zeleny here. David Chalian, stand by for me, because there was also some big news from the president today, Jeff, on North Korea, putting North Korea back on the list of state sponsors of terror. This is the president earlier today and what he said about this key decision.
As we take this action today, our thoughts turn to Otto Warmbier, wonderful young man, and the countless others so brutally affected by the North Korean oppression. This designation will impose further sanctions and penalties on North Korea and related persons, and supports our maximum pressure campaign to isolate the murderous regime that you've all been reading about and in some cases writing about.
You heard the president mention a name there, this young man, Otto Warmbier. He was the University of Virginia student who died just days after returning to the U.S. after being imprisoned in North Korea for some 17 months. And his parents sat with me and spoke with me back in September about why they believe the Kim regime should be labeled a state sponsor of terror.
Now, we see North Korea with the tensions claiming to be a victim, and they're claiming that the world is picking on them. And we're here to tell you, as witnesses to the terror of their regime, North Korea is not a victim. So we felt it was time to tell the truth about the condition that Otto was in. A perfectly healthy young American visiting there, an innocent young American, comes home with severe brain damage. But it's not like it happened and they shipped him home immediately. It's a year later. These people are terrorists. Kim and his regime intentionally injured Otto.
So, Jeff Zeleny, just for people at home trying to understand, when we know he now wants to designate North Korea as a state sponsor of terrorism, what does that really mean?
Brooke, what it means is it's just one more way for the U.S. to tighten the noose, if you will, on the North Korean regime. It's one more way to initiate more sanctions, what the president said the Treasury Department will do tomorrow. And we'll listen to Sarah Sanders right now, Brooke.
Oh, here she is.
Good afternoon. Thank you guys for being patient with us. I brought a special guest, so I figured you might be okay if we were a little bit delayed today. As you all know, the president hosted a very productive cabinet meeting this morning and made some news by announcing that the United States has again designated North Korea a state sponsor of terrorism. As the president said, one of the primary goals of his recent Asia trip was to pursue the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. This designation will impose increased sanctions and penalties on North Korea that will continue our progress toward that goal. Additionally, it is a reminder that North Korea has repeatedly supported acts of international terrorism, including assassinations on foreign soil. The president's position is this: the North Korean regime must be lawful. It must end its unlawful nuclear and ballistic missile development and cease all support for international terrorism. This afternoon, we have Secretary of State Rex Tillerson with us to answer some of your questions on this topic. He's going to come up and make a couple of remarks and then take questions on that topic. And as always, I will be back after that to answer other news of the day. With that, Mr. Secretary.
Thanks, Sarah. And as Sarah indicated, the President did make the designation earlier today, announced it in the cabinet meeting. And I think it's really just the latest step in a series of, as you can see, ongoing steps to increase the pressure. I call it the peaceful pressure campaign. The president calls it the maximum pressure campaign, so there's no confusion. They're one and the same. And I think this is, though, to hold North Korea accountable for a number of actions that they've taken over the last several months, the last year or so. Some of you will know that North Korea was designated as a state sponsor of terrorism back in 1988. So they have been designated before. That designation was lifted in 2008 as part of an effort to negotiate with North Korea an end to their nuclear program. That obviously failed because we can see where we are today. But as a result of actions they've taken, including assassinations outside of their country, using banned chemical weapons, these are all very, very serious actions on their part that put the public at risk as well. So that, along with a number of other actions that they've taken, resulted in their designation now again as a state sponsor of terrorism. I think, as Sarah indicated, the practical effect of it is we already have many of these actions in place through the current sanctions. It may, though, disrupt and dissuade some third parties from undertaking certain activities with North Korea, as it does impose prohibition on a number of other activities that might not be covered by existing sanctions. But I think importantly, this is just continuing to point out North Korea's illicit, unlawful behaviors internationally, and we felt it necessary to reimpose the designation for that reason. So with that, happy to take questions, and I'm going to let Sarah referee because I'm no good at refereeing.
So good at it.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Margaret. Yes. Is this move an intent to incentivize Kim Jong-un towards negotiations? I think it's been more than 60 days since we've seen some kind of test. Do you think that timetable is in any way promising? And why wait until we were back in the U.S.? The president said that there was hope for diplomacy when we were in Asia, and this seems to be counter that.
No, we still hope for diplomacy, and this is the timing of this is just one of us concluding the process. There is a very specific designation process that we have to go through at the State Department to be able to meet the criteria to make such a designation, and we wanted to ensure we had fully met all those requirements. Again, this is all part of just continuing to turn this pressure up, and we continue to turn the pressure up on North Korea by getting other countries to join and take actions on their own. We've had other countries in our visit to Vietnam. They have committed that they're going to curtail activities further with North Korea. Malaysia has indicated a curtailment. Singapore has cut off all trade with North Korea. The Philippines have cut off all trade. And just recently, the Deputy Secretary of State's been in Africa. He had meetings with the Sudanese government. The Sudanese government have traditionally been buying military weapons from North Korea. They now have agreed to halt all those purchases as well. So this is it's taking effect all around the world, and we think as it takes effect, again, this just continues to tighten the pressure on the Kim regime, all with an intention to have him understand this is only going to get worse until you're ready to come and talk.
Specific to the 60-day window, he hasn't tested in some time. You don't think
We're
it's a trigger?
We're hopeful that he continues this quiet period. That's our objective, is that he continue to be quiet as well. This designation, as I said, is one that we're required to undertake from time to time, and we've been monitoring the situation. We wanted to be sure we had sufficient evidence before making the designation. So this is a process that started actually several months ago.
Thanks, Secretary. You mentioned that you're intending to increase regional pressure against the North Korean regime. Do you have any indication that that is working? And if you haven't seen those indications just yet, how long before do you go down this path before the administration has to begin changing strategies?
Well, we get a lot of anecdotal information that it is working, and then we do have our own, intelligence sources as well. And then what the Chinese and others share with us, that I think the general belief is it is having a significant effect on North Korea. We know that there are current shortages of fuel based upon what we can gather from anecdotally, but also from certain intel sources. We know that that their revenues are down because a number of the revenue streams are being curtailed now. So I think it is having an effect. Is this the reason we haven't had a provocative act in 60 days? I don't want to suggest to you that I could say, but we're hopeful this period will continue. And again, I think the president in his address in Seoul, South Korea to the General Assembly, I thought he laid out the case very well to them, that he wanted them to come have talks because he wants to deliver a different future to the people of North Korea.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I have a couple for you. The first is, can you give us an example of a third-party transaction that is now covered, that was not covered by either existing American sanctions or the UN Security Council sanctions?
Well, there could be certain dual-use equipment that may not have been covered under previous sanctions that this would prohibit now a third party selling that dual use. And so, and again, I don't want to suggest to you that the designation is suddenly going to put a whole new layer of sanctions on them, because again, I think we already have North Korea so heavily sanctioned in so many ways with the UN resolutions that have been undertaken. But this will close a few additional loopholes off.
You and the president both referred to assassinations, plural. We obviously all know about the Kim Jong-nam assassination at the airport. Can you give us another example of another assassination on foreign soil?
I don't have anything that I can share with you specifically.
Secretary,